वीडियो बनाने में मेहनत ही हमारी चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I am 34 years old. After 10 years of marriage, my husband divorced me and married a billionaire's daughter. In a single moment, the life I had built for a decade completely collapsed. Suddenly, I was alone with a 6-year-old son to raise, rent to pay, school fees due, and almost nothing left in my bank account. My ex-husband didn't just leave me. He took almost everything. The house was in his name. Most of the savings were in his account, and the court case drained what little money I had left. Desperate to survive, I accepted a live-in caregiver job for an elderly billionaire who everyone said had become mentally unstable. I told myself it was just a job, nothing more. But on my very first night inside that mansion, something happened that made my heart stop. And in that moment, I realized this job was going to change my life forever. Before I tell you what actually happened, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me which country you're watching from the comments. Now let's begin. Within a few weeks of my divorce, I realized something terrifying. If I didn't find a job soon, I wouldn't even be able to pay my 6-year-old son's school fees. That's when I saw an online listing live-in caregiver needed, private estate, high salary. The job description said the patient was an elderly billionaire with severe mental instability. Most people probably would have avoided it, but I didn't have the luxury to choose, so I applied the same night. 2 days later, I was standing in front of the largest mansion I had ever seen. Tall black gates, a long stone driveway, and a house so big it looked more like a hotel than a home. A middle-aged woman opened the door. "You must be Sarah," she said. I nodded nervously. "I'm Laura Hensley, Mr. Hensley's daughter." She looked elegant and cold at the same time. Perfect clothes, perfect smile. But something about her eyes felt distant as she walked me inside. "Before you start," she said calmly, "you should know my father's condition is very difficult." "How difficult?" I asked. "Most caregivers quit within a few days." That should have scared me, but instead I simply said I wouldn't quit. Not because I was brave, but because I couldn't afford to quit. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "My father used to be one of the most powerful businessmen in the country," she explained while walking down a long hallway. "But over the past year, his mental condition has become unstable." "What kind of unstable?" I asked carefully. "He screams, throws things, and sometimes attacks the staff," she replied calmly. "Great. Just great." But I reminded myself why I was here. My son's face appeared in my mind. School uniform, lunchbox, little backpack, and I knew I couldn't fail him. We finally reached a large wooden door. "My father's room," Laura said, opening it slowly. Inside sat an old man in a wheelchair staring at the window. His hair was grey and messy, and his hands were shaking slightly. The moment he noticed me, his expression changed. "Who is this?" he shouted suddenly. I froze. Laura sighed like she was used to this and calmly explained that I was the new caregiver, but the old man immediately yelled that he didn't want another one. He slammed his hand against the armrest, grabbed a glass from the table, and threw it across the room where it shattered, loudly against the wall. My heart jumped. Laura barely reacted. She simply said that this was what she dealt with every day. The old man kept muttering angrily while I slowly walked closer. I greeted him softly, introducing myself and telling him I was there to help, but he glared at me and told me to leave him alone. Still, I didn't move. For a moment he just stared at me. Then suddenly he turned his wheelchair toward the window again and ignored me completely. Laura looked slightly surprised and said that was actually better than usual. She showed me the medicine schedule, the daily routine, and where everything was kept before leaving me alone with him. The rest of the day passed slowly. The old man refused help, shouted a few times, and even knocked over a chair once, but somehow I managed to get through it. By evening, I was completely exhausted. A housemaid showed me my small bedroom on the second floor. It wasn't luxurious, but it was comfortable. That night, around 9 p.m., I walked downstairs to get a glass of water from the kitchen. The mansion was quiet, almost too quiet. As I entered the living room, I suddenly heard laughter. A man's voice. I stopped immediately. That voice sounded strangely familiar. My heart started beating faster as I slowly stepped into the room. A tall man was standing near the bar table with a drink in his hand. When he turned around and saw me, his smile slowly grew wider. For a second I couldn't breathe because the man standing in front of me was my ex-husband, Jason, the same man who had divorced me after 10 years and married the billionaire's daughter. He looked me up and down slowly, then laughed. Well, well, I guess life didn't work out too well for you, huh? My hands started shaking. Jason took a sip of his drink and smirked before asking if this was what I did now, working there as a caregiver. Then he leaned closer and whispered mockingly that I was basically a servant in his house. I felt my chest tighten and quietly said that I should leave. But Jason laughed again and told me to go ahead, then asked how I planned to feed my kid without the job. His words hit me like a knife because he knew exactly where to hurt me. Then he stepped aside and gestured around the massive mansion. Welcome to your new workplace, he said coldly. And try not to break anything, employee. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. The woman who had married my ex-husband was the same billionaire's daughter who owned this house, and somehow I had just become a worker in their mansion. For a few seconds I couldn't move. My mind was spinning. Of all the houses in the city, of all the jobs I could have taken, I had somehow ended up working for the same woman who destroyed my marriage. Jason leaned against the table and watched my face carefully. You look surprised, he said with a smirk. I didn't answer. What's wrong? He continued mockingly. Didn't you know whose house this was? No, I said quietly. Well, now you do. He slowly walked around me, clearly enjoying the moment. Life is funny, isn't it? He said. 10 years ago, you were my wife. He paused and laughed softly before continuing. And now you're working here as a caregiver. His words felt like needles. For a moment, I really wanted to quit. I imagined packing my bag, leaving the mansion, and never seeing these people again. But then another thought immediately appeared in my mind. My son. His school fees were due next month. The rent needed to be paid. The grocery bills were waiting. I cleared his throat, closed my eyes for a second, and forced myself to stay calm. Jason noticed the change in my expression. Oh, I get it, he said. You need this job. I stayed silent. He chuckled softly. Don't worry, I won't fire you. Then he leaned closer and whispered, Someone has to take care of the crazy old man. My hands clenched, but I still didn't respond. After a moment, he finished his drink, set the glass down, and started walking toward the stairs. Good night, Sarah, he said casually. And try not to get hit by anything tomorrow. He likes throwing things. Then he disappeared upstairs. I stood there alone for a long time. That night, I barely slept. Part of me wanted to run away from that house immediately, but the stronger part of me kept reminding me why I was there. My child needed me to stay. The next morning, my work officially began. Mr. Hensley was already awake when I entered his room, and the moment he saw me, he looked irritated. You again, he muttered. Yes, I said calmly. Me again. He rolled his wheelchair slightly away from the table and complained that he had already told everyone he didn't need a babysitter. I gently replied that I wasn't there to babysit him. I was there to help. He stared at me suspiciously for a moment. Then suddenly he grabbed a small book from the table and threw it across the room toward the wall. Leave! He shouted. The book hit the wall and dropped to the floor. I quietly walked over, picked it up, and placed it back on the table. I'm not leaving, I said. For a brief second, he looked surprised. Then he turned away and started mumbling to himself. The morning routine was difficult. Sometimes he shouted, sometimes he refused to eat. But little by little, I began learning how to deal with him. When I spoke calmly, He became slightly calmer. When I gave him space, he stopped yelling. By the third day, something interesting happened. He allowed me to help him drink water without shouting. It was a very small victory, but it felt important. Meanwhile, Jason occasionally appeared in the house, and every time he saw me, he made sure to say something humiliating. Once he loudly warned me to be careful with the tray because servants should always be careful. Another time he laughed and told a guest, "She used to be my wife." The guest looked at me with pity, while Jason simply smiled proudly. Every time it happened, I forced myself to stay quiet because losing this job wasn't an option. A week passed. Then one morning, something strange happened. 2 doctors arrived at the mansion carrying medical bags and went straight to Mr. Hensley's room. Laura came with them. They closed the door, but I could still hear voices inside. After about 30 minutes, the doctors left. When I entered the room afterward, Mr. Hensley's condition was much worse. He looked confused, and his hands were shaking more than usual. He started yelling again, louder than before. It felt like all the small progress we had made during the week had suddenly disappeared. Suddenly he grabbed the plate from the table and threw it across the room, sending food scattering across the floor. "Get out!" he shouted angrily. I tried to calm him down. "Mr. Hensley, please." Before I could finish, he picked up a glass of water and threw it toward me. The glass hit my shoulder and fell to the floor, shattering into pieces. The noise brought 2 house servants running into the room. "Sir, please calm down," one of them said. But Mr. Hensley was completely out of control now. He kept shouting and pushing the wheelchair forward, trying to grab anything he could throw. One of the servants quickly pulled a small medical kit from the cabinet. "I'm sorry, sir," he said nervously. Then he prepared a syringe, and within seconds, they gave Mr. Hensley an injection. At first he kept struggling, but slowly his movements became weaker. His shouting faded, and finally he went quiet. His head dropped slightly to the side as the medicine took effect. The room became silent again. One of the servants sighed and looked at me. "Don't worry," he said. "This happens sometimes." But something about the situation didn't feel normal to me because just a day ago, Mr. Hensley had started to trust me, and now suddenly, he looked worse than ever. That night, something happened that changed everything. I was walking down the hallway near the study room when I heard voices inside. Laura's voice. And Jason's. The door was slightly open. I didn't mean to listen, but then I heard something that made me stop. "The medicines are working," Laura said quietly. Jason laughed softly and asked how long it would take before he completely lost control. Laura calmly replied that it wouldn't take long, maybe just a few more weeks. My heart started beating faster. Then Jason said something that made my blood run cold, and once the doctors declare him mentally unfit. Laura finished the sentence for him. Everything becomes ours. They both laughed. I quickly stepped away from the door before they could notice me. My mind was racing. What did they mean the medicines were working? What medicines? The next morning, while I was helping Mr. Hensley with breakfast, something unexpected happened. He suddenly looked at me very seriously. For the first time since I met him, his eyes seemed completely clear. "Listen carefully," he whispered. I froze. "They're trying to make me look insane." I blinked, in confusion, and quietly asked what he meant. He leaned closer and spoke slowly. "The medicines," he said. "They are poisoning my mind." I stared at him. Part of me thought this was simply another sign of his illness, but another part of me remembered the conversation I'd overheard the night before. Suddenly, Mr. Hensley grabbed my wrist. His voice sounded desperate. "I'm not crazy," he whispered. "They're trying to make me crazy." For a moment, I froze. His words echoed in my mind, and the conversation I had overheard the night before came rushing back to me. Laura saying the medicines were working, and Jason replying that once the doctors declared him mentally unfit, everything would become theirs. Slowly, I looked into his eyes again. They were clear, not confused or wild, just tired and full of fear. "You're right," I said quietly. He blinked in surprise and asked what I meant. I told him I had heard them talking, his daughter and my ex-husband, and that they had said the medicines were making him lose control. For several seconds, he didn't say anything. Then his shoulders slowly dropped, like the last piece of hope inside him had finally broken. Tears filled his eyes as he spoke slowly about how he had built everything in that house, his companies, his life, everything. And now his own daughter wanted to take it while he was still alive. His voice trembled as he looked down at the floor and said that, if they succeeded, he would lose everything. Seeing that strong old man suddenly look so helpless hurt my heart. For a moment I thought about my own life, how I had lost everything after my husband left me, how helpless I had felt standing alone with a child and no future. I took a deep breath and then said something that surprised even me. I told him I wasn't leaving him alone, and that no matter what happened, I would help him. He looked up at me in disbelief, and for the first time since I had met him, a small spark appeared in his eyes. That night, we made a plan. The next morning, I secretly checked the medicines again, and just as I suspected, the pills were meant to confuse his mind and make him appear unstable. I decided to do something risky. I stopped giving him those pills and secretly replaced them with the correct medication I obtained through a trusted doctor. At first, nothing